Welcome to another session of the Oral History Project in Sayville. The date is the 1st of September 2011. This marks the 72nd anniversary of the beginning of World War II in Europe, making it clear that Neville Chamberlain's statement had to be corrected. There is no peace for our time. Each speaker will have about 10 minutes or so to speak, and please, without interruptions and comments as we've had previously. There was, I think, too much interaction between the participants. Some of you probably know already that on the 1st of October, in 1 month, there will be an observance at the Gillette Park, the community field, is it called? Marking the, how do we say this now, the duocentequinquagesimo. Obviously I learned this at Columbia, where else? Anniversary of the settlement of the Edwards family. That's all that it marks. That is the 250th anniversary. Columbia was marking its 250th some years ago, and that's where I became familiar with the word. That's all that it marks, people. Do not think that there was a Sayville here. There was no post office. That began, I believe, around 1837, since in 1937, the post office marked its 100th birthday. Only the Edwards family here. There was no village, no Sayville, no post office. Thank goodness for the Suffolk County News, which has been our historical source for many decades. I cannot speak of that in recent decades. I traced out the history of the Kensington Hotel. The Kensington, which should have gotten landmark status instead of being demolished in 1954. I mean, the whole community focused around it with countless meetings, events, and then it was gone. I also had expected someone from the Suffolk County News here. The edition of the news, what can we say? Scrapbooks, films, and unless you have other plans, there is the archive in this library, which certainly will accept relevant local historical material. I've donated Polak scrapbooks and Rako scrapbooks. The Rako family settled here in 1866, coming from Germany with the Munkelwitz family. Some of the materials today that are in print are somewhat disappointing. We probably all remember Charles Dickerson, very kind, generous person, the real estate office with his father, J.P. Dickerson, who had been an undertaker, incidentally, before going into real estate. And Charlie's sister, very, very dear people. Well, Charlie wrote a history, which unfortunately does not show a very careful research. The book should have been thoroughly proofread before it went into print. I wrote a review of it for a Long Island journal. I was very, very kind, and still, Charlie was very disappointed with the review. I have to be honest in this profession. It's pretty tough. Those of you who have known the academic world, you have to be honest, and thus results. I read a recent article about Sayville doctors during World War II, and the article essentially was only about Dr. McDonald Sr. and Dr. Eller.
Solomon?
That's all that were mentioned. So I wrote a full letter in response, indicating that the coroner lived here. That is Grover Silliman. The bodies that were found were brought to Rayner's or to Isaacson's. There was no morgue around. So there was Dr. Grover Silliman. There was Dr. Oxholm. There was Dr. McCullough, who brought me into the world. There was Dr. Wiesman on Green Avenue. And if you're looking for surgeons and specialists between Sayville and Bayport, the number comes to around 20. What is this about a shortage of medical care in World War II? But such things are written, and thus the problems. I'm still looking for this. I hope it wasn't destroyed in a serious fire at the news office around 30 years ago. It was the 1956 BBC. A group from Britain came here and made an hour-long film on Sayville. It was fantastic. I hope there wasn't only one copy. I really intend to call Mrs. Cohallen about this. I hope over in Britain there is a copy. A copy really should be secured for this library because it tells of a Sayville, almost as time moves on, 55 years ago or so. Oakdale recently had an excellent pictorial history. I read it carefully, sent a letter with details to the authors at Dowling. I'm delighted that Oakdale has a historical society. Meanwhile, for decades, we're waiting for the Sayville Historical Society to come forth with an illustrated book. I hope that the facade of the Suffolk County News office on Candy Avenue will be preserved a landmark status. There is one of the last vestiges of an old Sayville. As we remember Mr. Hogue, Joe Jan, plenty of memories. The Sayville Fire Department promised us a book marking its centennial. This was in 2005. The fire department, the two rival groups, Hose and Ladders, became united in 1905, so the centennial book was to appear in 2005. I was in touch with the parties there concerned with it, and the final comment was, we can't do it. Now, this is just a comment on what things have come to be. In 1928 or so, yes, marking the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Ladder Company, the late, and he lived down here at Green Avenue and Main Street, Arthur Jedlicka, wrote a solid history of the fire department for those first 50 years. It is a remarkable reference work. And then in 1955, marking the 50th anniversary of the whole fire department, there was a superb, heavy covered volume with pictures of all the firemen and the history of the fire department. We can't do this in 2005 and up until now. And I hope the Sayville Historical Society, of which I'm a life member, will eventually come forth with a pictorial history of Sayville. We've been waiting for this for decades. In fact, Charlie Weber was living, and there was full assurance, Charlie, the book is dedicated to you. Well, Charlie died back in 2004. It's now 7 years. We're not writing an encyclopedia of Sayville. It's a pictorial history comparable to Oakdale's fine volume. I was born in Bayshore in 1936, an extremely hot summer at Dr. King's Hospital, and grew up on Roosevelt Avenue in Sayville. At age 2, I remember my mother saying, "Don't go near the windows," as the wind was howling outside. My father was an electrician. He had a very successful business as A1 Electric. I went to the Sayville Elementary School, and the junior high, and the high school. I remember every teacher from kindergarten through. In fact, as I look at the elementary school, I can even picture where I was in each of those rooms, beginning with kindergarten teacher Priscilla Cleaver, and of course the variety of teachers along the way. They were fabulous. They gave us an excellent education. Because of that education, I went on to what was then the New York State College for Teachers. It's now the State University at Albany. Majored in Latin, minored in social studies. Did very well up there. Then went on to Columbia. And you know, back in those times, one simply applied to a college, and that was it. Today, there seems to be hysteria. As people have to prepare for certain exams, they compete so, they apply to half a dozen colleges. Life used to be so simple and orderly and successful. I applied to Columbia for the master's degree in classics, and then for the doctorate in medieval and ancient history. It all flowed so fine. Needless to say, there was no tuition at Albany like in the City University, and needless to say, and the youngsters today, I still have a cubicle in Butler Library at Columbia where I'm working on volume 3 of my Latin manuscript census. These youngsters today cannot believe, whose parents must be paying around $40,000 or $50,000 a year. This would be beyond belief back in our time. My father paid $30 a credit for each course at Columbia, so it came to $900 a year. The kids just can't begin to grasp this today. I remember wartime in Sayville, my mother standing in line with the coupons outside of Bohack's on West Main Street, opposite the Catholic Church, there to get butter. I remember the rationing scene for sure. And I remember the scrap drive in September 1942. Sayville had accumulated a half a ton already of scrap metal. There was such spirit, there was such unity, to say nothing of those who were watching the skies atop of old 88. And let's not forget, she was a great local resident who moved to California, and we've never heard of her again. Her parents are buried in Bohemia, the Horoda family from Lakeland Avenue. This was Jenny Math, M-A-T-H. She was #1 in selling the most World War II bonds in Sayville. And the parades were fabulous. The sidewalks were packed for the Memorial Day parades. I remember the parachuters up in the golf course up Lakeland Avenue. First time I ever saw parachuters, although there was Jimmy Horning. Then there was such spirit, such a feeling. It was one of the greatest displays of hometown spirit. Just a side note, Sayville got through the Great Depression. There certainly was a great deal of difficulty. I just want you to know that in February 1933, the Sayville school teachers took a 10% cut in their salary. I don't know of anyone losing a job. And if you're interested, the superintendent of schools back then was the one and only Seward Travis, and his salary was reduced from a grand $6,500 to $5,800. And I remember the stores on Main Street. Do we have to bring up the Bialers and Joe Fiala and the paint store, the Lilco office? Oh, such complaints of Lilco back then. Is LIPA doing so much better today? There were two very dear ladies. You'd pay your bill, and the bill was so minimal for electric, at the lighting company office, which was on Main Street. There was Adelia Rogerson from Bayport, of the old Rogerson family, and Richard Vale's mother, Mrs. Vale. The two ladies were there at the counter. Real hometown scenes. Sayville produced some certainly interesting individuals. Just several months ago, I would say the one piano protege of Sayville, certainly of the highest caliber, Billy Reither, passed on. His father, incidentally, was a teller, William Reither, in the old Oysterman's Bank, and he also played the piano in the old Sayville Theater when there were silent pictures. Another individual was Russell Edwards, class of '35, who became the society editor for decades at the New York Times. And so it goes. It truly was a different time for the whole area. Some of you may not be familiar. There was a grand lady. My father did lots of work at the estate in Bayport. We remember her. She went through a series of marriages. Margaret Todd Smith Monahan Richter. When she got married, a special Long Island Railroad train brought the guests out to Bayport. That would be unthinkable today. And when Robert Roosevelt died, another railroad came by and took all the family and the mourners to Brooklyn, where he was buried in Greenwood Cemetery. This would be unthinkable today. Sayville's first permanent teacher, 1839. I mean, once again, we are 3 generations from the Edwards settlement. This was John Woods, whose home was what became Lou Terry's store, and then the Biala store. That was John Edwards' home, close to Railroad and Main Street. I've spoken my share plus. I thank you all for listening. May we turn now to Mr. Limouze, my high school general science and biology teacher. I'm talking 1949-1953.
Yes, my name is Harold Limouze. I was born and brought up in Huntington, New York. Attended schools in Huntington, and during the Depression, I was fortunate to be able to attend a junior college in Bronxville, New York for 2 years, and from there I transferred to the College of Worcester in Worcester, Ohio. I was fortunate there because I had 2 jobs to help pay for my tuition and living and board. I was a waiter in the senior girls' dormitory. They were fed on table every morning and noon and night. It was a grand time. All the waiters, we had a lot of fun with the senior girls. The other job I had was to work in the chemistry lab, and I had to keep the soapstone tables, the chem tables, polished with sandpaper to keep the surfaces nice and clean. But it was worth the waiting on girls and the work worth going to the chem lab, because I got my BA degree from Worcester as a combination science in biology and chemistry. I graduated in 1941 from the College of Worcester, and things were rather difficult. It was just before World War II. Europe, England was having so much troubles with Hitler at that time. But I was fortunate because for some reason or another, the junior college I went to, the head of the chemistry department was going on a 2-year leave of absence. So I got a telephone call during the summer saying, if you're free and don't have a position for the fall, come and join Concordia. So I worked there and taught general inorganic and semi-micro-qualitative analysis there for about a year and a half before I went into the chemical warfare service of the United States. I eventually ended up during the war in Europe. Fortunately, I was one of the lucky ones rather than going to the Pacific. I had a full trip of Europe, courtesy of the United States government, and I think I toured every country over there, because my outfit that I was with was a specialized outfit, and whenever they needed us, they would call us and we would go here, there, and everywhere. So it was interesting. After the war was over, I went to Columbia through the GI Bill of Rights and got my master's degree. And while at Columbia, I found out there was an opening for a science teacher in Sayville, New York. Now, I had known Sayville many years before. When I was in high school in Huntington, there were very few high schools on Long Island in Suffolk County. However, the few that there were, most of us, we had interscholastic sports with each other. So being in Huntington, at the time I was in high school, it was very common to come over to Sayville and to the beautiful gymnasium which Sayville had at that time. It was a standout. It was the best gymnasium that we met in all the schools we had. You name it, Sayville had the best one. As a matter of fact, when Islip High School was built, they copied the gymnasium of Sayville and built it in Islip. So that was a copy, because the original Islip gymnasium was a bandbox. It was so small you could practically reach across four or five people holding hands and covered the whole thing. But that's beside the point. After getting my master's, I got this job in Sayville as a beginning science teacher, And back in 1946, when I arrived here as a teacher, I knew no one except, I should say this, except one. My wife will love to hear this. I only had one colleague here in Sayville that I knew of. It was a girl named Florence Weinberg.
Yeah.
She was a daughter of Bill Weinberg, who lived on Foster Avenue. And Florence Weinberg was a cheerleader. And as a result, because of interscholastic sports, I got to meet Florence. And during the summers of 35, 36, when I was 3, we would, another fellow and I would hitchhike over here to Sayville and date and go out on the old ferries from Sayville to Cherry Grove. The old hotel was still there before the '38 hurricane. So as a result, we enjoyed not only the companionship, but the beauty of Sayville, the friendship for Sayville. The town at that time was just a wonderful place to be. And going over to the Sayville, to the beach, was interesting because the bay was as clear as a running brook. You could look down from the deck of these old ferry boats, and you could watch the blue coral crabs scurry as the boat went over them. The bay was absolutely clear, beautiful. So we enjoyed that. Anyway, that was in 35, 36 during the summers. 37 too. Well, oh no, 37 I graduated from high school. We didn't make it over here then. That's when I was planning to go to college. After I came here to Sayville as a beginning high school teacher, I did have, as I mentioned before, all the freshmen at that time. The freshmen came from as far away as, we had one boy from Lake Grove. We had boys and girls from Ronkonkoma, Lake Ronkonkoma, Bohemia, Oakdale, and of course West Sayville and Sayville.
Holbrook.
Yeah, did I mention Holbrook?
No.
Yes, Holbrook also. It was interesting because it was such a mixture of personalities and the people, the kids came from different type homes because the settlement in Bohemia, for example, would be different than the settlement in West Sayville. So you had a very good intermingling of individuals in classes. As I said, I had all of them. At that time, if I remember correctly, in the Sayville High School, going from freshman, we had 4 years in the red brick building, which was built in 1928. We had all the kids from those towns, 9th through 12th grade, and there couldn't have been much more than maybe 350 kids altogether. Because I had all the freshmen, and all the freshmen, I had 120 students, from all these different towns. There was 120. So I don't believe that the high school had more than 350 graduate for the whole school. Graduation classes were small in comparison to when I retired. But it was a great experience, and the kids, the students, you couldn't get a better group of kids. It makes me kind of furious. Excuse me. They were so wonderful. The teachers were great. Some of them were odd. I guess I was odd too, I don't know. But we had some odd teachers that did odd things that today would be frowned upon by the general public. There was one gentleman who, in history, I won't mention his name, but he was the history teacher. And for a class, he would prepare his lessons, the first period class. Now, back in those early days, the first time they came out with these huge tape recorders, they used to be about the size of a suitcase. Well, this man had one of these, which he put on his desk, and the first period in the morning, he would give his lecture and tape it.
I was in such a class.
And